Hey everybody, this is Sean Patrick Flanery. You're listening to the Long Story Short Show with Dave Benison in Niagara Falls, Canada, which is one of my favorite places on planet Earth. Killer. If you haven't been, go check it out.
I got a really cool guest. I'm looking forward to talking to him. And his name is Sean Patrick Flanery. Flanery, correct? I said it right?
Although most people pronounce it Sean Patrick Flanery. But I answer to hey you, yo, homie, any of that stuff.
There you go. So, who is Sean Patrick? Well, Sean is an actor, an author, and he's a martial artist. He played Connor, is it McMagnus?
We'll go with McMagnus.
Okay.
It's actually McManus. But
McManus,
we'll
okay.
Gives me a sort of, I don't know, mythical quality, I feel.
That's right, yeah, and that was from Boondock Saints, and of course there was a sequel to that too, so you were in both of them. You were also in another really cool one that I loved was Young Indiana Jones. And that was pretty awesome. And you were in Saw, one of the Saw movies. I think it was the final one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saw 3D.
What was really cool is last week on my show, I had a girl named Alex Kavanaugh, and she did all the costume design for every single Saw movie. So she was on my show last week. So it's kind of a cool tie-in
cool.
that you're here today. So one of the things I also realized that you worked in a soap opera and you were on Young and the Restless for a little while, correct?
I was, and let me tell you this. I've done films. I started in the industry back in '91. I used to call my mom on the phone when I'd get a big gig, something huge to me, because I've made a career out of doing movies that nobody sees. So, for example, like one of the first killer names that I got to work with that's recognizable in the States, because I work with a lot of famous people in the UK doing Young Indie, but the first time I came over back home and I did Suicide Kings, and I called my mom, I'm like, Mom, I'm doing a movie with Christopher Walken.
Oh, wow.
And she's like, oh, that's great, honey, are you eating well? I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. And I'll tell you, my whole career, I'd list these names. I was doing Boondock with Willem Dafoe. She's like, that's great. Are you staying healthy? Yeah, Mom, I'm staying healthy. Man, let me tell you this. When I did Young and the Restless, I was Elvis fucking Presley.
Oh, really?
I said,
wow.
Mom, I'm doing Young. She's like, oh my God, Victor. I mean, kept me on the phone for 4 hours talking about that show. Wow. So I've never been more famous in my mom's eyes than when I did YNR.
Then you did YNR. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, like, one of the things, like, I was wondering, like, you did YNR, and then you've done, like, some action movies. And do you find a big difference? Like, is it a different pace acting in, like, you know what I mean? Like, in a soap opera compared to, like, an action film? Like, the pace of how it's filmed and stuff like that?
Well, yeah, the pacing is probably the most pronounced difference. The pacing at soap opera, I mean, you're doing, 5 pages an hour as opposed to 5 pages a day, which means you don't get 15 takes, you get 1 take, and they expect it to be your final performance on day one. Exactly, you don't get rehearsal time. You're supposed to do that the night before on your own. I don't care how you do it, where you do it, when you do it, but have it wrapped up in a nice box and bow tied correctly before you show up for work.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's the main difference. But other than that, it's the same. Acting's acting.
Of course, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, on our show, we do a lot of stuff with authors and that, and you actually wrote a book called Jane 2. And one of the things I wanted to do is, before I move on for that, I want to read something that I read out of your book, if that's okay. Sure. Yeah, and this is from Sean's book, and it goes like this.
I believe there are only ever a handful of moments in a child's life that truly shape who he is or who he is to become. There are plenty of moments for fine-tuning, but only a handful that mold the sharp, memorable features of the face and also the soul. This is my handful.
There it is. I did it.
There we go. That was perfect. And one of the things is why I wanted to read that, because it's such an inspiring quote to start off your book. And I guess that's my question is, what inspired you to write this book?
Inspiration to write. I didn't want to become a writer. I don't want to be an author. And by that, I mean, the goal is not to write. The goal was to tell a very specific story. So I wrote this, and that's the story I wanted to tell. Meaning, an author, sometimes you get handed a job and say, go research this and write the book. I have no desire to do that, per se. Deborah Foreman right here. How are you? Damn right you can give me a hug.
You can do the hug, yeah, that's okay.
Texas boy. Oh, really good. Really good.
We're in the middle of a hug here, so which is totally cool.
You know, I did it specifically to tell that story. So now that the story is told, I'm not looking, you know, to go and do research material on something that has nothing to do with me.
Right.
So the inspiration was something that happened to me when I was a kid, when I was 10 years old. And the editor of Jane magazine back in 1999, her name is Jane Pratt. She came to me after reading a piece that I did for either Details or Detour, because I moved out to LA to be a writer, oddly enough. And then the acting thing kind of took hold. But she contacted me and she wanted me to write a piece for her magazine. I had no idea what I could possibly lend to a woman's magazine. I mean, if you look at the women's magazines now, they're teaching 13-year-olds how to properly fillet their boyfriend, which is bizarre to me. So I had no idea what I could possibly lend. But I said, you know what, how about if I write about my first kiss? And she goes, wow. I said, oddly enough, serendipity, her name was Jane. I said, let me write that short story. And so I did. And then some companies came out of the woodwork to try and get the rights to it. And I knew it was certainly an impactful story to me, but I had no idea the length of the legs that it produced. And I didn't want to sell the rights, and so I kind of sat on it for a long time. And then a few years ago, I decided to write it in long form in a manuscript and write it as a book. And so I did. And my intention was to sell it on my blog site, but then a publisher got wind of it, and the next thing you know, it's being published by the biggest Hachette book company known to man.
So how long did it take you to write it?
It took me about 3 months to write the book.
Right.
Only because there's no such thing as writer's block when you're writing your history. You know what comes next.
Yeah.
It's not subjective. It's chronological.
That's right. Yeah. So one of the things that I want with the book is, like, who is it geared for? Is it like for adults, kids, everybody? Like, who did you sort of write it to?
Well, here's the thing. It's life. It's a slice of life. It happened to me when I was 8 years old.
Right.
So I didn't write it I didn't do a market survey. I didn't try and satisfy this demographic.
Yeah.
I just wrote a truth. And oddly enough, although the most, probably the biggest demographic is probably women. Right. I think it's a man's book. I think it's a young boy's book, to be honest. But I know a lot of young boys aren't reading it. But that's who I think it's properly designed for. But it's just a truth about a young kid growing up in Texas that met somebody that changed everything he thought he understood about the planet.
Yeah. Did you want to deal with them? I can pause this and we can finish it up. Here. Alrighty, we're back, and one of the things we were talking about your book, one of the things I wanted to find out was what was like sort of your favorite, or like a reaction that you got when you wrote the book, like maybe from a fan, or like did you ever get like some kind of like fan mail or somebody that said something that inspired them from the book? Is there something like that that's ever happened?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, some of the most flattering praise I've ever gotten in my entire career has been over this book. And, of all the things that you do, when you do a film, if you get feedback from that, there's 100 people that are responsible for a movie moving somebody.
Yeah.
But with the book, there's only one. So there is no flattery that comes closer to the bone than flattery over this book.
Over the book. Wow. That's fantastic. So moving on, one of the things I wanted to ask, I know you're into martial arts. So what did obviously you did a lot of training. Was there a certain discipline that you trained in?
Yeah, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I started in Taekwondo when I was 9 years old,
right,
and did all kind of martial arts growing up. But really, once I discovered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it took over everything else. So it kind of overtook my life, so much so that I started my own academy in 2004, and it's still there to this day. It's a huge part of my life.
Wow, that's great. And you started when you were young then, right?
Yeah, when I was 9 years old.
Yeah, and you still continue it. Can you continue it today then,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Wow. So, and training, like you're still training. So do you train like every day, or is it
sometimes not every day, but 4 or 5 times a week minimum?
Right. Okay, well that's fantastic. So, like, do you have any upcoming like films or anything, or appearances that you're going to be doing? Besides this con, I'm sure you got
starting to shoot a film in Petaluma, California, in a month.
Okay.
And it's tentatively titled A Shot Away, but oddly enough, it's about martial arts and fighting.
Wow. There we go. Well, I'm going to wrap this up because you're starting to get busy now. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us today. And I'm hoping maybe you could someday come and talk to my wife on her, and she'll do a whole book thing.
She loves brother. I appreciate it. Please give your wife a hug from me. I appreciate anybody reading my book. So thank you.
Fika with Vicky. And thanks a lot, Sean. And that was...
Anytime, brother. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.